Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today for our UNB Talks webinar on boosting your financial health. We are so happy to have you all here today, so thank you for taking some time out of your morning or your afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. And a huge thank you to Ian Hardy, our alumni expert, for being here with us today and sharing his expertise. We are so happy to be hosting this session and incredibly grateful for our alumni community this past year who have really stepped up to support their fellow alumni with these various webinar sessions that we've been hosting throughout the year. So it's really, really nice to have so many different sessions on professional development and personal interest to bring to you. So knowing how difficult this last year has been, we really hope that today you leave with more insight and expertise on how to prepare for your future. So for tonight's webinar, Ian will be providing us with an overview of 5 ways to boost your financial health. And so we have about 45 minutes to an hour for this session, and we will begin with a presentation from Ian, followed by a Q&A period. So I know that some of you pre-submitted your questions in advance, but at any point throughout the event, we really encourage you to drop any questions you might have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So don't be shy, Ian's here to help answer any questions you might have, whether it's something that comes up in the presentation or anything that pops up during the discussion and you think you might benefit from his input. Please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A box. We are using webinar mode today, so we can't see you or hear you, but again, the Q&A box is your area to chat with us. So with all that being said, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Ian Hardy. Ian graduated from UNB St. John in 2008 with his Bachelor of Business, or 2007 actually, and then he began his career in financial services in 2008. So he is a Sun Life advisor, and he's also the president of IMH Financial Solutions. And he's also a fantastic UNB alumni volunteer, specifically with our career talk session that we've had for a number of years now, where he has been a mentor. He's provided career advice and support to our students. So a huge, huge thank you to you, Ian, for being here with us today. We sincerely appreciate it. And with that said, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So as Tash said, I'm here to kind of talk to you about 5 steps to boost your financial health. You can share a presentation here. Get started. So for many Canadians, money worries are the greatest source of stress. You've probably heard of lots of different statistics out there about increasing debt levels and those kinds of things over the years. So 44% say it would be difficult to meet their financial obligations if their pay is late. And at this point in time, a lot more retirees are also going into retirement with debt, which is something we want to try to help people plan to avoid as best as possible. So Tash mentioned that there's 5 steps that we're going to look at today. So the first one is assessing your current situation and just kind of taking a look at where you're at. Can't really know where you're going to go if you don't know where you're starting from. We want to make sure that we're creating some goals, whether those are short-term or long-term goals, making a budget, and there's lots of different ways to go about that, which I'll touch on through the presentation. And we can do all this. We can make great plans and all that type of stuff, but if we don't actually act on the plan, it doesn't really matter. And then what can we do on an ongoing basis just to keep your finances healthy going forward? So as I mentioned, the first part we want to do is assess your current situation and kind of take a look at what you're currently doing, what you've put in place already, and then from there trying to figure out where we might be able to help you take the next steps. So one of the big things that we always like to take into account on that previous screen mentioned that 44% of people aren't sure how they would pay for something if their check was late. So one of the things we want to take a look at is how much do you have available in case of an emergency? Challenge with having a lot of available credit out there these days is that it's a lot easier to spend more than you're making. Have you actually taken a look at creating any financial goals? And they don't have to be, some people have the retirement goal of I want to retire at 60 with this amount of money. It's really more about creating a general idea of where you want to go and how we can take steps to get there. Making sure that you have some sort of budget. Doesn't have to be completely detailed, but making sure that you do have something written down. And are you saving for retirement? Are you taking advantage of employer programs that are available to you? What kind of insurance coverage, if you do have any insurance coverage in place, and do you know what your net worth is? Nice thing about net worth is it's a nice thing that you can continuously look at to see, are you making progress on paying down your debt levels as well as increasing your savings? So step 2 in this is creating goals. So they're both short-term and long-term goals that you want to create. Talked about saving for retirement. And for a lot of people, retirement can seem like it's a long ways off, but it can get there relatively quickly. And all of a sudden, I've spoken to many people over the years when they're 10 years from retirement and haven't really done a good job of saving. And now they're trying to figure out how much they can put away. The earlier you can start on something like that, the better you're going to be for your retirement, and less you're going to have to worry about it when you're hitting your 50s and you're moving towards retirement. On the shorter term side, I already mentioned we want to take a look at building an emergency fund. So emergency fund, it depends on your situation. If you own a house, you probably want to have a little bit more saved in case something goes wrong with the house. But also in case you lose your employment, making sure that you can pay for your bills that come up. A lot of people, I know quite a few of the questions that we got today were in around student loans. What can you do about that? Paying off credit card debt, as well as building a minor fund for home improvements, save for travel whenever we're allowed to travel again. Hopefully that's sometime later this year, but who knows? And also saving for a wedding might be another objective for some people. On the longer term goals, again, might be saving for children's education. There are programs through the government that help you save for that through our ESPs. And you might have interest in starting your own business either in the short term or near term as well. So once we've kind of figured out what your goals are, you want to figure out which ones are the most important to you. As an advisor, probably one of the ones we would focus on certainly is creating an emergency fund, just to make sure that if something comes up, you don't have to use credit or anything like that, to make sure that you can pay for it. Maybe you need some new tires. It is that time of year where you might be taking your car into, to change it into the all-season tires, and might need to $400 or $500. So just making sure that we have some money set aside for things like that, or bigger things as well. And then moving down that prioritization list and checking them off as we can. So step 3 in this is actually making a budget. And there's lots of different ways you can go about making a budget. You can write down everything that you're spending, or you can follow a more general guideline. So on the next page here, so have 3 different ways of kind of choosing a budgeting method. So the first one is a 50-30-20 budget rule. So in the 50-30-20 rule, essentially what you're doing is with 50% of your after-tax income is you're allocating that to your housing and food and kind of the needs based of what you have to have on a daily basis to live. About another 20% we want to allocate towards savings, whether that's short or long-term savings. And then the other 30% is we're aiming to spend that on more of the fun stuff in life, whether that's travel or going out to restaurants or those kinds of things, any sort of entertainment. The next one is not too far off of that 50-30-20 rule, but probably a little bit more specific. Again, as you can see it in here, it also says about 50 to 60% on fixed costs. Trying to follow that as best you can. Sometimes it's hard depending on what your mortgage payments are, or what your rent payments might be hard to get that down to a 50 to 60%, but trying to follow that as closely as possible. Want to put 5 to 10% in savings. So again, I talked about short-term goals and creating a emergency savings account. So that would be where that would go. And then 10% for investments. That's more your longer term saving for retirement or other things that you might want to do long-term. And again, we want to make sure that we're finding that balance in life. So 20 to 35% guilt-free spending. The last method on here is called the envelope method. This is probably a little bit more of an old school approach, mostly because it requires you to use cash, which I don't think too many people do anymore. And essentially what you do with the envelope method is you set aside each month a certain amount that you're able to spend. And once that envelope's empty, you can't spend anymore. So it could be, say you had $1,000 to allocate between groceries and entertainment and gas and those types of things. And maybe you put $600 in the envelope for groceries for the month, $200 for entertainment and $200 for gas, whatever it happens to be. But basically, once more so on the entertainment side, once you've run out of that $200, you've committed to the fact that you're not going to spend any more of those dollars, or you're not going to spend any more money on entertainment. Always, I think I said earlier, you want to kind of assess where you are currently. So the other in budgeting, part of assessing where you are is figuring out where are you spending your money. I think there's been a lot talked about over the years about, you know, everybody getting their daily coffees from Starbucks or those types of things, and how much you could save. And that I think some figureheads out there will say that, you know, if you didn't spend your money on your Starbucks, you could afford a house. Not sure that's exactly the most accurate statement. But just taking into account where you are putting your dollars on a daily basis. So if you like having your daily coffee and muffin, then I don't think you should stop. But being aware that, you know, that might be $1,000 a year that you're spending, or buying lunch daily. Again, that's, you know, $10 a day, $50 a week. So you're spending about $2,600 a year just by buying lunch out every day, and rather than maybe bringing it for a few dollars. Yeah, just if that's important to you, I'd say that's probably not a bad idea to continue to do. But if it's just more out of, you need to prepare a little bit more for the week, that might be a good spot to be able to save some dollars, as well as dinner out once a week. Again, if that's something that's important to you, I'd say keep doing it, but just being aware that you are spending that money there. So the other thing you want to make sure you do is you're separating your needs and wants. So making sure you want to make sure you're paying for all your rent or mortgage payments, all that type of stuff. And then once you've done that, figuring out where can you spend your extra dollars on wants, such as, again, on the previous slide, again, if that eating out dinner once a week is important to you, go ahead and do it. But just making sure that you separate those out. So whenever you're budgeting, it's important to have an understanding of not only where your money is going, but where is your money coming from. So I think for most of us, it's, you know, between a salary, maybe some bonuses from work, there might be some government payments that are coming in as well. Just making sure that you have that written down and you have an understanding of what's coming in, because sometimes what ends up happening is you write it in, you kind of figure out everything that's coming in, and then you write down your fixed expenses and some of the stuff that you know you spend the money on a regular basis, and you're not quite sure where the rest of it's going. So by listing all of this stuff, you're able to get a better understanding of exactly where your money's coming from and where it's going. One of the things you could do if you're trying to figure out exactly where you're spending your money is, if you took around you probably do it on your notes on your phone or something along those lines. And there are some apps that you can do this where you track exactly what you are spending. And even from a mentality standpoint, that can sometimes help you make a conscious decision to go, oh, when you go to write that down, you might go, why am I spending my money on this? As opposed to before, you might have just automatically pulled out the debit card or credit card and tapped. By writing it down, it might give you an opportunity to think twice about a purchase. So that type of thing can really help with figuring out where your money is going. With anything, got to act on your plan. Mentioned that earlier. If you don't actually do anything with the plan, it's all great. It's like setting any goal. You can say that this is what you want to do, but if you don't actually start acting on it, you're not going to get anywhere. So one of the things one of the common things out there to say is to pay yourself first. Really what that's about is making sure that before you take into account your entertainment funds or your rent and all that type of stuff, is let's set aside some money for long-term savings. And that can be, you can set it out as a percent. A lot of times the number that's put out there is somewhere between 10 and 20% of your income, but really it's about just getting started. So if at this point in time it's $25 per pay that you can set aside, that's the important thing. And just make sure that it's automatic coming out of your income. Also, a lot of times with employer programs, you can do automatic payroll deductions that go into an account through that, which certainly would help with you not even having to think about it, because it doesn't show up in your account, in your bank account. It'll just show up in the savings program through your employer. So the next part here is, we talked about building an emergency fund. So 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. And when you're looking at 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, this really depends on your situation. If you're in a industry where there's a lot more volatility and you might be more likely to lose your job, you probably want to be closer to the 6 months of living expenses. If you're in a very steady industry, I always use government as a example for steady income. Most of the time, you don't see too many government employees getting laid off. So in those situations, you might not need as much. And when we're looking at living expenses, you want to make sure that you're looking at the actual fixed expenses that you can't get rid of. So again, those entertainment type expenses, you don't have to save for those necessarily, but making sure that you can pay your rent and all those types of things. And really making sure that if something comes up, you usually use the roof on a house. If that type of expense came up, making sure that you have something available to be able to get the roof on the house fixed as well. So when we're looking at paying off your debts, there are a few different ways to go about trying to pay down your debts. So first one here is avalanche method, which is just making sure that you're being most effective with your dollars, which is, so if you have a credit card that's 29% interest, and then a credit card that's 11% interest, and a line of credit that might be 6 or 7%, what you want to do is focus on that credit card that's 29%, because that's the one that you're losing the most money on, because the interest is accruing much more quickly on that one than the other ones, and you just continue to pay down whatever the highest interest debt is first. Snowball method, that one's more about a mentality. Sometimes we want to kind of check off that we've been able to accomplish something. So using the snowball method is pick the smallest amount of debt. So if you had $500 on one credit card, $5,000 on another, and then like a $10,000 line of credit, start with the $500 credit card, because you can get to that one being paid off and you can have that sense of accomplishment. So yeah, if that one's really focusing on, do you need that kind of mental thing to reinforce what exactly you are doing? Then the last one is debt consolidation. So that's where you take all of the debt that you have outstanding and put it into one loan and pay it off over, whether it's 5 years or 7 years, depends on what the situation is. Most of the time when you're doing debt consolidation through a bank, they're probably going to ask you to pay it off as quickly as you can based off of your debt servicing ratios. So how much of your income is going to debt? They want to make sure that you're paying that off as quickly as possible. So saving for the future. So we talked about plan for the unexpected. You never really know what's going to happen. So whether it's losing a job or unexpected expenses, just making sure that you have something set aside for those emergencies. Saving for the long term. Again, looking at retirement, the earlier you get started, the less dollars of your own money that you have to put away, because over time, compounding interest will help with your savings. And then set a monthly target for retirement savings as well. And make sure that as your income increases, that you're increasing your retirement savings along with that. A lot of times that's relatively easy with programs through work, because you can, a lot of times they're set at 5% of your income. So as your income goes up, you're going to have 5% continue to come off. If you're doing anything outside of the work, then you just want to make sure that you're setting aside that extra money. So if your income goes up by 5%, make sure you're increasing your savings by that amount. Always a difficult question is whether you should pay off your debt or save for the future. And I think it's always probably best to do a little bit of both. So paying off your debt, you want to make sure that that you are making headway towards getting that paid down. But at the same time, you want to set aside some money so you don't have to go back into debt if an emergency were to come up. And then with everything in financial planning, it's really about what's important to you. If you're all right carrying a little bit of debt and putting away a little bit more for retirement, that's quite all right. Or if you're a person that really hates having debt, then maybe we should focus on paying down your debt and then moving on to saving for the future. It's really important to make sure that you're doing something that makes you feel comfortable. And then keeping your finances healthy. So first off, you just want to take control of your budget. So I mentioned earlier that sometimes after tracking your income and expenses, you kind of get to that point and you go, I'm not sure where my money's actually going. So just make sure that when you're doing that, you can kind of figure out where exactly your dollars are going. Maintain a record of expenses. So again, just making sure I talked about writing it down on a pad, or there are some different apps that you can use, which I think is on another slide here in a minute, that you can use for tracking all of your expenses, and then make adjustments as necessary. Sometimes there'll be short-term ones that you might need to make on your entertainment. Other things can be, maybe I talked about 50% for your fixed expenses. Maybe you've gotten above that, and maybe you need to make some changes to get back towards a 50% number for your rent or your mortgage and all those things that fall under that category. So it might be finding a smaller house, although at this point in time, finding houses in St. John seems to be rather difficult because everything seems to be selling. But, talked about tracking your spending a couple of times now. And there's a number of different apps out there that you can use, whether it's Mint, You Need a Budget. All of these different ones have different benefits to them. I think Mint does a good job of tracking, to talk about net worth earlier. I think it will do a good job of bringing in all of your investment statements, whether it's from work or from the banks. The You Need a Budget one is a little bit better for, again, just following budgeting. Next part here is just understand your credit rating. So it's always important to, when you're going to get, I know there were a number of questions that we got on first-time home buyers and just buying houses in general. The first thing that's going to figure out whether you're going to be able to qualify for a mortgage or any sort of debt is going to be your credit score. And really the things that go into your credit score are you paying your bills on a regular basis, history, and how much debt do you have outstanding relative to the amount that's available to you. I think on the next one here, it says, so amount owed. So amount, it's going to be important to, there's a debt servicing ratio that they're going to look at, and that as a percentage of your overall income, most of the time they won't let you go above 40% for all of your debt. So that includes a mortgage, which they include your heat expense and taxes on. Also, if you're in a condo, if there's any condo fees with that, they would include that. And then anything that you're paying on a car loan or a student loan, or on or anything outstanding on credit cards and lines of credits as well. Payment history, that's probably the most important part, is making sure that you are regularly paying everything on time. Length of credit history, that can always be a bit of a challenge, where you just need to have a history. They want to make sure that they can see that you have regularly paid back your bills. Types of credit, so are you using a lot of credit cards or lines of credits, those types of things. And then new credit requests, so that's, are you consistently trying to find new available credit for yourself? That can be a little bit of a red flag for loaning people money if they're always trying to find new ways to get access to more money. So as I mentioned, these were kind of the 5 steps that we went through. So again, we want to make sure that we're assessing where you're at, create some goals. I know one of the first people I worked with, I was talking to him the other day. We had created some short-term goals for him, and we're reviewing that he had actually checked off a lot of those goals. Again, that was back in 2008, and they were short-term things like buying a TV and those types of things. So if you can put it down on paper, it kind of makes it a little easier to hit those goals. Making a budget, making sure that you have an idea where your money's coming from and where it's going is really the important part of that. How you get there is you kind of have to figure out what works best for you. Acting on your plan, again, just if we can make all these plans, but if we don't do anything about it, it's not really going to get us anywhere. And then just continuously making sure that you're updating your plan and figuring out where your money's going and making sure that you're doing everything you can to hit the goals that you want. So if you need any advice, make sure that you reach out to an advisor. Statistics say that if you have an advisor, you're going to have 4 times more assets, and that's probably more about making sure that they're holding you accountable for actually putting away the money and doing those types of things, and making sure you don't make decisions that you might not want to with your investments as well. So yeah, that's the end. So stop the share.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for sharing that presentation.
No problem.
I know we have a ton of young alumni here with us today, and as a young alumni myself, that was incredibly helpful. One of the interesting things was the saving for your retirement, because I know you made the comment, like, it seems so far away. And for all of us here today, I'm sure we're in the same boat. If you're under 35 or you've recently graduated, But one thing that I constantly hear, like my parents or older adults say, is it's really never too early to start saving and planning for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear you say that as well, because I know I myself have to start doing that. So thank you so much for that overview.
So one of the big things in that I
yeah.
see as, I don't know if mistake's the right word to say it, but not taking advantage of employer programs that are available to you. So if you can get free money from your employer, take advantage of it. Because no matter who the advisor is, they can't get you. Most of the time, it's like a matching program. So if you put away 5%, the company will put away 5%.
Okay.
No matter how good of an investment you find, you're not going to find something that's going to match 100% of the money you put away.
Right.
So that's the first place to look, is making sure that you take advantage of that.
Great. Perfect. Thank you for that. So we will start with the Q&A period. And just a reminder to everyone, I see one question has come in so far. If you have any questions at all on any parts of the presentation or other things about your finances, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But we will start with some of the questions that you've pre-submitted. So there was some really, really great questions here. A lot of them focused on first-time home buying or home buying in general. So I think Ian will start sort of with that category. And we'll start off with this one. I guess someone asked whether there are common home buying mistakes.
I think the one that I've seen, or in talking to realtors as well, or lawyers, any of those professionals that are around that transaction, is people aren't necessarily prepared for the additional costs beyond just the down payment. So you have to think of things like a home inspection, but there's also land transfer tax, those types of things that happen a lot around there. And the lawyer fees themselves, lawyer's not going to work for free, so you have to be prepared to pay the lawyer for what they're doing as well. And all depends on the property, but you can also have things like there might be an amount of oil in an oil tank that they want you to pay for because they already paid that expense. So now that can be something that's negotiated when you're buying a house, but it's something to be aware of, that there are those additional expenses.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Well, that's super helpful. And I know at some point in your presentation, you sort of showed a breakdown of the percentage of like how much of your income should be going to different things. So one question I know that a lot of people have, especially when they're buying their first home, is like how much of your income should be going towards your house, like depending on what, I guess, price of a house you might be looking for. I think they typically say, and I might mess this up, so please correct me, 30%?
So if you look at what they'll let you go to on your, like so there's there's a total debt servicing ratio and there's a gross debt servicing ratio, I think is what the other one is. It's been a few years since I did credit. So, but one is on the amount you can spend on your house. So 32% is like the absolute max they'll let you go on the house. So that would be including your mortgage. The heat is usually the other thing they include, and then the property tax. Also, again, I mentioned in the presentation that if you have a condo fee, they include that. So the max they'll let you go to is 32%. As to what should work for you, it depends on the type of person you are. Because if you're a homebody that's going to spend a lot of time in your house and you're not going to do a whole lot of traveling or extra stuff, and home's important to you, then maybe spend a little bit more of your income on your home. But if traveling is more important to you, then it's probably better to allocate a little less and have that extra money so you can go traveling.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Ian. That's great. Another question we had related to home buying was the pros or the cons of paying off a large purchase at one time or making installments.
Right. So that, like I think I said it in the presentation, it really depends on your personality. If you don't like having the payment, then probably paying it off in a large lump sum, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're fine with having the monthly payment, then it's trying to figure out what the opportunity cost is of what else that money could do. So if you're going to take money out of, like, for instance, if your down payment on a house is probably a big one, is how much should you put down on the house relative to what you could get with investing it. Right now, mortgage rates are 2.5% to 3% at most. How long that lasts for, I don't know, but in a tax-free savings account, and if you're investing it, you might be able to get 5 or 6%. So you might lose out on a little bit there by not having it invested. But again, it really comes down to your personal preference as to how you prefer to handle your finances, making sure that, again, probably looking at that first statistic that was there, 44% of people wouldn't be able to afford something that came up. So making sure that you avoid getting yourself into that situation where if an expense came up and you might not be able to pay it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Just one other question on the home buying side of things. So someone has asked, what are some ways to maximize the first-time home buyer incentive? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so the first time home buyers is you're able to withdraw money from an RSP towards your down payment of your house up to $35,000. What ends up happening with that is you have to pay it back over a 15-year period. If you don't, it gets added to your income. So with anything, it's just putting the money away is probably the main thing. But if you're looking for ways to put in some extra money and get that amount higher, is when it comes around to tax return time, if you're already putting some money away into the RSP with plans of using it for the home buyer's plan, is rather than going and spending that on a trip or whatever it happens to be, is putting that back into your RSP to use towards a home buyer's plan. Or if you are in a job where you get bonuses, at that point in time, put some more into your RSP so that you can use it for that.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Actually, I said that was the last home buying question, but I do have another one here. And I think a lot of people are thinking about this right now because the market is so crazy across the country, not just in New Brunswick. And I know we have people joining us here from various provinces. So what's your opinion on whether the housing market will keep going up and how long you think it might last?
So not my area of expertise to know exactly how that's going to work out long term. So it probably depends a little bit on interest rates. With interest rates low, it's a lot easier to get a mortgage. Now, there are lots of rules out there that for getting a mortgage as to what the interest rate is that they use. So right now, I said that you could probably get a mortgage for 2.5% to 3%, but you actually have to qualify based off of about a 5% interest rate right now. So if those interest rates start to go up and it's harder to qualify, that would probably slow it down a little bit. One of the things I read a few years ago, and this was more in talks of the Toronto market, because that's been going crazy for years now, was they actually compared it to the St. John market, which seemed interesting. So back in 2008, there was the mention of a possible Irving head office and a second refinery here, which made the prices all shoot up really quickly. But then neither of those things happened. Eventually, Irving did build the head office here. But so what ended up happening was prices didn't actually really come down that much in St. John. They just kind of, people would hold onto their houses for longer, trying to get that price that they were looking for. So if they were saying that's probably what's likely to happen in Toronto, I would assume that would happen across the country. But it really depends on a whole bunch of different factors. And there are things like people investing from outside of the country as well into properties and those types of things. So hard to say exactly what will happen long term. Interest rates will play a big role in that, and then demand as well. So
for sure, great. Yeah, I know it's such a huge thing right now, and I don't know if anyone really has the answer because it's happened so quick and it's across the country. So thank you though for your insight on that. So I wanted to move over to a question that we had about student loans. Someone had asked if you could provide some general tips and tricks about paying off your student loans.
So I think with any loan, it's just set a plan as to how quickly you want to pay it off and kind of stick to that plan. Although I think the same tips and tricks that I said for getting the money into the RSP for the home buyer's plan is the same thing for student loans. If you want to get it paid off a little quicker, is take a look at when you get a tax return, or if you're getting a bonus, or if you're in a job where you get paid overtime, is taking that extra money and allocating it towards paying off the student loan quicker.
Okay. Awesome. And I'm going to skip to a question that we had come in here live, actually. Someone had asked, when married, how does your spouse's debt affect overall credit score when thinking about buying a house?
So it won't affect your credit score directly. It depends on who's applying for the mortgage or whatever the debt happens to be. If you're applying for it jointly, then they're going to take into account everything for both of you. If you're applying for it yourself, then it would just be based off of your situation. So your income and your debts. Where that can become a little tricky if you're trying to do it on your own is if you both applied for the mortgage together and then you're trying to go get a car on your own, they're going to take into account the whole mortgage into your payment when you're trying to apply for a car loan by yourself. So that could be one of those spots where it gets a little trickier.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Ian. We also had a lot of questions pre-submitted to us, and thank you everyone for sharing these great questions. A lot of questions about like tips for budgeting and saving money. So one of them was, what are some tips for budgeting and saving while still enjoying your life? So I know you touched on that a bit in the presentation, and I don't know if you wanted to expand a bit more.
So again, it's, as I said in the presentation, it's really just about setting what your priorities are. So you want to make sure that you can pay all your normal expenses, and again, you want to make sure that you're saving, but like, you never know what's going to happen. All of a sudden, maybe a pandemic comes along and you can't do what you were planning on doing anyway. So taking advantage of opportunities to be able to enjoy life along the way is important. So it's just making sure you set aside that right amount for whatever it is that you're trying to do. So if you want to go on a vacation once a year, making sure that you're setting that aside. Just basically plan for it. Yes, the main thing.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think your suggestions for like creating your goals, like that's really where you have to start to see.
Yeah.
Like you said, if having lunch every day, going out for lunch every day is really important to you, then keep doing it. And yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So we also had a question about a self-build home, actually. So someone had asked how to acquire funding or loans for a self-build home, and especially how to do so when you're newly self-employed.
Yeah. So I did mortgages a few years ago, so I don't know all the exact rules today, but those become a little bit more complicated. And probably, so if you're doing the self-build, they're going to do what are called draws. So at different stages of the build, they're going to allow you to take some money out to be able to pay it off. But what they want to make sure that you have the capability of doing is paying for those up front. So you have access to, whether it's a line of credit or you have access to cash savings that can pay for those until you're able to draw out money. So there's a certain percentage of that, of the build, that they want to make sure that you have access to. I don't remember what that is off the top of my head. As a newly self-employed individual, that's going to make your life more difficult for any sort of financing. I know that because I'm self-employed myself. They're always looking for history with self-employed individuals. Usually it's 2 years is what they're going to try to take a look at. Now, if you have a history in the industry of, say you were a carpenter and you worked for a carpentry company and then you went out on your own, they might take that into some consideration. But really depends on who you're talking to and what you're looking to get accomplished. It will be more of a challenge with a self-build home.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian. And thank you for that question. We had another one pop up here live. So someone has asked, can having LOC or credit cards with higher limits, for example, 10,000 plus, available to you but not using, does that hurt your credit or the amount of money you would qualify for when you apply for mortgages?
Usually not. It probably depends on the company. Everybody probably has slightly different rules, but it's more about how much are you using of that. So I think at one point in time they did calculate it based off of available credit, but now they do it based off of what you're using. And your credit score is actually affected by the amount that you're using of that line of credit. So if you have a zero balance on the line of credit, it's not really going to affect anything, but it's also actually going to help your credit score because you have available credit that you're not using. Usually if you're using over 80%, that's where it drags down your credit score fairly drastically. If you get in around below 50%, that starts to improve it. And if you're down around zero or not really using the whether it's credit card or line of credit, it's certainly going to make things look better for you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So we had another question about budgeting, and someone had asked what, I think you again mentioned this in your presentation, but perhaps we could just repeat it. They had asked about the recommended ratio of your living cost, your rent and your groceries to your income. Yeah.
So again, it's for your after-tax income. So the stuff that's actually being deposited in your income, probably want to allocate about 50% towards your rent and your groceries and all that type of stuff, if you can. It obviously depends on where you live. In St. John, it's probably a little easier if you're buying a house here than if you're in Toronto, because I'm not sure you can get a house for cheaper than $1 million in Toronto. Not entirely sure, but you probably have to move really far out to do that. But here it might be a little bit easier to allocate about 50% to those types of expenses. So you have to kind of adjust to your situation, but if you could stick in around that amount, that's good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we had another question here, which is interesting, and they've asked, what are the signs of a good versus a not so good financial advisor? So as an advisor yourself, what might
Yeah.
you suggest for this person?
So I think it's all about, do you trust the person? And I think you can kind of get that feeling. You probably want to meet with them once or twice. Right now, it's probably more over video conferences like this. I know that's how I've done a lot of my meetings over the past year or so. But again, making sure that you feel that you can trust them. I'd also look for, are they a continuous learner and are they trying to improve? It's a type of industry where you probably get in and you might not have the letters after your name for improving or for education, but if you want to look for somebody that's trying to figure that out. So for myself, I'm working on 3 different designations currently. I had one previously, but that one lapsed when I went to a different role for a little while. So, but currently I'm working on making sure that I'm improving my skills to make sure that I can help my clients better. So those would be probably the 2 things. Again, the big one is, do you trust them? Would be.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to do one more question here before we wrap up. We're getting close to 12:45. And so someone has asked when and how to start investing. So I'm thinking you'll probably say now. Anytime is the good time to start investing. But any tips you have for that, Ian?
As soon as you can, and you start with whatever you can. So just because you don't think you have a ton of money doesn't mean don't start, because all of a sudden I think I mentioned earlier, like put away $25 per pay. If you start with that, all of a sudden you won't even notice it. And then you want to start to increase that over time, making sure that I think what ends up happening a lot of time for people is as their pay increases, their lifestyle increases drastically as well. And their savings doesn't necessarily increase at the same amount. So it's making sure that you're finding that balance of, if you're getting pay increases, make sure that you're putting away some additional money towards whatever it is, whether it's short-term savings or long-term savings as well.
Hey, fantastic. Thanks so much, Ian.
No problem.
So we are close to the end of time here, and I don't see any more live questions coming through, which is fantastic. So thank you all so much for joining us here today and for sharing your great questions, whether you pre-submitted them or you've shared them live with us today. We really appreciate this discussion and hope you gained some extra knowledge here from Ian. A huge thank you to you, Ian, for being here with us today and supporting this webinar, sharing your expertise. We couldn't do these events without the support of our alumni, so thank you very much. I think we appreciate that.
I think if anybody has additional questions that they think of afterwards, if they want to send them my way, I think
absolutely.
Tash has my contact information. You can send it to me.
For sure.
Through email is probably the easiest place. Also have a Facebook page and LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect with me on those as well. Awesome. I do post a few articles a week, usually with some different information around whether it's financial planning or different things like that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic. So this webinar has been recorded, and we will send a follow-up email to all of you who have attended today with a link to the recording, as well as a post-event survey, because we'd love to hear your feedback on any future events you'd like to see or on this event in particular. And like Ian said, he's happy to answer more questions you might have. So I will include his contact information in that email as well. On our website, you can also find a ton of webinar recordings for the ones that we've done this year. There's some on career planning, on LinkedIn, some personal interest events as well. So feel free to check that out at unb.ca/alumni. And just really wanted to thank everyone for being here today, for taking part in this event. It's such a pleasure to be able to connect with everyone through these different sessions. So we do have some upcoming events that are taking place here soon as well. We have one on April 28th, which is on wills and estate planning, which is kind of a nice connection after this event if you are looking to plan ahead for your future. You can see them up here on the screen. And then the other one we have is on May 3rd, and that's on our 10,000 Coffees platform. So it's about careers in business, and it's being hosted by someone from JD Irving Limited. So if you're not currently a member of 10,000 Coffees, I really encourage you to check out that as well. It's our virtual networking platform where you can connect on a monthly basis with some fellow alumni or some students. So be sure to check that out. We also are hosting these webinars thanks to the support of our affinity partners. So they'll be popped up on the screen here as well. I just want to say a quick thank you to TD and to Manulife and to MBNA for their support. Again, if you have any questions or you'd like to learn more information about these affinity partnerships, you can visit our website. These are exclusive to UNB students and alumni, so be sure to check that out. And I just want to say another thank you to Ian so much for being here today, and to all of our attendees. We hope that you enjoyed this session and would love to see you at some of our upcoming events. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.